Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shauna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And I am here with Dr. Lisa, what can I say? Glancing at the calendar, realizing that we are now 5 weeks away from the election. It just, I mean, it's overwhelming to even think because our world is literally going to change no matter what the outcome is. So, yeah, little anxiety producing over here, Lisa.
Yes, when I looked at the calendar and I did that math as well, I was like,
Mm-mm.
holy moly, 5 weeks. That is going to
Mm-hmm.
go in the blink of an eye.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. And
Yeah.
so I'm torn between should I continue to stay glued to the news or not for my own sanity on it, because it's this fine line of staying
Yeah.
informed
Yep.
and overwhelm. Pick which one. So I'm leaning towards overwhelm right now, and I need to get away from it. But we just had a debate too recently that I'm still debriefing with friends and family, more than a couple weeks later. So yeah, need to take a step away.
Oh, like the debate, you mean? That's what you're debriefing with friends and family?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly,
You didn't have a
exactly.
debate with your friends and family. Got it. Got it.
Oh no, no. Look, I know not to step in that territory at all because, yeah, like I mentioned before on a previous episode, if we all want pleasant holidays,
Mm-hmm.
we need to think about our engagement on these topics. I'm thinking about it and choosing to just enjoy my turkey.
Yep.
That's all I'm saying. So,
So
yeah,
this is funny. I think I texted you this, but after we recorded that episode about certainty and about how do you engage with people who disagree with you, The
yeah,
Atlantic dropped a podcast that addresses that exact thing. I forget exactly what it's called, but the podcast itself is called Good on Paper, and the discussion is about the research around how do you present differing ideas and whether that reinforces people in their corner or not. So I was like, well, they must be listening to our podcast, Shauna.
hello, exactly.
Yeah.
Look, I'm glad you mentioned that because you did send that to me. Let's drop that in the show notes for today so people can continue to
Mm-hmm.
grapple with that topic because that is, yeah, we're going to just continue to encounter it. People think it's an election day, it's actually election season. And so, how we continue to experience that season is going to be quite interesting. So yeah, we'll share. We're the pod that shares pods. There's enough room in the podcast world to go around, but we'll certainly share
Yep.
that. But
Yep.
Lisa, guide us into the word of the week.
Yes, so another concept, and this one is going to be connected to phase one that I will talk about here in a bit. So, we wanted to define or think about decentering, but specifically, I'm going to talk about decentering whiteness. It is a phrase or concept that I think we hear a lot about in DEI, whether it's during trainings, whether it's on TV, watching documentaries, this notion that to move towards a more equitable and inclusive environment, we need to decenter whiteness. And I think we are remiss in not defining what we mean there and assuming that people understand that. So, if we think about the US, that context specifically, we have 400 years where there has been and continues to be a racial hierarchy. And what that means is there is a legacy of white supremacy, and that translates into white cultural norms becoming the standard. So Shauna and I have talked about this in the context of the professional workplace and the ways in which we define what it means to be professional and how those standards arise from whiteness, right? And so the white cultural practices, white ways of being in the world, access to power and resources that are derived and seen through whiteness. And so that would be centering of whiteness. So part of the work that we want to do here is to look at that history, look at how that translates into the present day, and essentially shift our focus and decenter that reliance on or assumption that what is normal is white, or rather the other way around, I suppose. What is white is normal, right?
Right, right.
So that's what we mean when we say decentering whiteness. I feel like it's a complicated phrase the more I kind of go over it in my head. And like,
Mhm.
if you say that to someone who isn't steeped in what we do, Shauna,
They
like
won't get it.
it's meaningless, right? Meaningless.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what do you
Yeah.
think about that?
That's right. That's right. That's right. Well, let me kind of give folks a parallel to this. And you all have to remember this is coming specifically from a only child perspective. I have the immense privilege of being an only child and, in fact, an only grandchild on my maternal side of the family. It would literally be like someone saying to me, Shauna, you're not the center of the world. You're not the center of the universe. Everything is not focused on you. Everything that happens, every decision that is made cannot be based upon you, Shauna. So you can't be the center of all things. And unfortunately, we all function in a country and sometimes in a world where the center of understanding rests on a privileged group, which happens to be white individuals or male individuals or heterosexual individuals or. And so given that, taking yourself out of or taking the privileged group out of the center then shifts everything we understand. And Lisa, you remember when this was a while ago on LinkedIn where they started sharing, there was a young person that started redrafting or redrawing the art in medical textbooks. You remember that? And the art was specifically, whether it was the art or the 3D models that you see in the doctor's office, many of them, most of them that I had seen, I think all of them that I
Yeah,
had
yeah,
seen up
all
until
of
that
them.
point
Yeah.
were white and
Yep.
predicated on whiteness. And even as an African American person, it had not dawned on me that I had never seen another
Mhm.
skin
Mhm.
color. Or, for example, those of us that are CPR certified, I don't recall, maybe you don't either until more recently, there had never been one of the test dummies that you use,
Yep.
test dolls that you use that were in other shades or
Right.
hues. And so,
Right.
given that, that is a very clear example of how it's
Mhm.
literally baked into our system structures and our
Mhm.
country around it is one way and it's always been this one way, and questioning that one way then forces all of us to think in ways that none of us is used to, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
I thought about this the other day when with that example, and then also with my own hair care. Um, Interestingly enough, there's just general hair care, but then there happens to be the ethnic hair care aisles.
Mhm. Mhm.
Why does the aisle that worked for me, why does that aisle have to be ethnic when we all have a ethnicity? So those types of things where it's literally baked into everything we do, just consider how those identities that are
Mhm.
privileged happen to shape the entire system that functions around them. So it's a really good word, but you're right, Lisa. Most people will not really get that word. So just think about out of the center, get that group out of the
Mhm.
center, and hopefully
Mhm.
that will help. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you did a way better job of describing that than I did. I think that that is that single child, only child example is
Right.
a really good way to understand it, right? But in that sense, it's really clear someone saying to you, Shauna, the world doesn't revolve around you. Whereas with
Mm-hmm.
whiteness, it's a lot more happening in the background. And
That's
it's
it.
entirely possible for a white person or white people to not understand that the whole world, or at least in the US context, revolves around whiteness, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yep. That's
yeah.
it. That's it. Yeah, that's a good one. Ooh, we have to
Woo!
keep talking about that decentering one now that we've given
Decentering.
folks a strong definition of it. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But Lisa, tell me about your experience here. I want to get the firsthand recount of "Am I racist?" Tell me all about it.
Okay, so listeners, I have not discussed this with Shauna
No, no,
because I want
I
to.
promise.
I want to get a. I want to get a reaction, like a raw reaction, because it's kind of
Okay.
it's funny, right? So there is a mockumentary, so a documentary, but it's a mock, right? Like some of you might know Borat, the British comedian that pretended to be from Kazakhstan, I think. And so this idea that, he's interviewing people in this persona, but it's not actually real. There are various iterations of that sort of thing. So it's called Am I Racist? And when I went, so I looked at the website for this mockumentary. And I didn't obviously do a diligent job of reading about it and getting some background. And I went into it thinking that it was a documentary or an exploration of how we understand whiteness and DEI training. And with some, I did believe that there was going to be some critique of DEI professionals, right? But I went into it with that mind frame. So this is where it's funny, because as it turns out, this mockumentary is produced by the Daily Wire and stars Matt Walsh, who is a right-wing podcaster. So it is actually an anti-DEI mockumentary, poking fun at and trying to dismantle what they see as a quote-unquote radical left racial ideology around inclusion, diversity, and equity, right? So he poses as he is a white man, and he poses as an individual who's trying to better understand his whiteness and understand systemic racism. So he reads White Fragility. He reads Kendi's book. There's several quotes from Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist book that come up on the screen. And I went with a friend, and she didn't do any research on it. And the whole time, she and I felt very uncomfortable because we believed it to be one thing and it was actually another. And so we kept looking at each other and like laughing nervously. And there weren't that many people in the theater, but it was getting some laughs. And she and I would just felt like we had this cognitive dissonance, right? Because we couldn't understand what the point of this film was, because we thought it was pro DEI, and it wasn't. And so we're in there and we're like, I don't know where this film is going. Like, I'm not exactly sure what this guy is trying to do. And I had never heard of Matt Walsh, so I didn't have that background. So he goes to this, there's this facilitator who is a woman of color who hosts like an all-day or 2-day session around processing white guilt and the grief as you start to decenter whiteness and kind of start to understand what that means. And the whole workshop costs about $35,000. And there were maybe like 15 white people in this session, right? And he's in there under a false name and is essentially like playing up and behaving as he thinks a white person who is feeling guilty about whiteness might behave in that session. Anyway, like, they have a room off to the side for people who get overwhelmed with emotion as they start to process their whiteness and what that means. The quote-unquote cry room. And so he goes to that room. Like, it's all feigned, right? It's not real. And while he's in that room, the people in the workshop look him up and realize that his name is not Stephen, that he's actually Matt Walsh, and that he's actually like this right-wing anti-DEI person. And there's a film crew in there, right? So some of this was filmed. And so my friend and I were like, that just felt really, really unethical. Like, I don't understand the point of that. And so after we'd watched this entire mockumentary, we said, let's read some reviews. Let's go back out and go to places like reputable media outlets that do film reviews and see what they say. And that is when I discovered what this movie actually was, because there's also no mainstream media reviews. None. It's been completely blocked. So no one is reviewing it, right? Because of its message. Oh, the other thing that was really funny, Shauna, was in the trailers before the movie, there was this pro-Trump documentary about how victimized he is and how the left is out to get him. And she and I are looking at each other and we're like, oh, great, this is coming out right before the election? Like, what? I don't understand why this there's like a trailer about the appointing a new pope, which is a new movie coming out, and some other action movie. And then there's this Trump documentary that is so clearly like pro-Trump. So we're just like from the get-go really not understanding. Now it makes sense why that Trump documentary was trailered in this movie. So anyway, we were really embarrassed that we hadn't done our due diligence. So we went to this movie and we gave money to it. But in hindsight, like with me watching the RNC, the Republican National Convention, I was thinking, you know what? It was actually a really good idea that I went to see this mockumentary, because it gives me insight into the ways in which people who are on the conservative right, who are anti DEI, are framing and thinking about the problem. So every time they interviewed someone, they popped up on the screen how much that someone charged to be interviewed to talk about DEI, right? And so Robin DiAngelo was in there. And there's actually a producer on the show who is a man of color. And at one point in the Robin DiAngelo interview, he brings his friend in and says, I'm just going to give you reparations right now. Goes into his wallet, takes out money, $35 or something, and gives it to the producer. And he's like, well, I feel like I can just do this. Is this something that I can do right now? And the producer's like, sure, I'm never going to turn down money. And then they push Robin DiAngelo to go give this producer cash. Like, I mean, it was just, I don't appreciate that I gave like $15, $20 or what it was to this movie, because it was the fourth largest grossing movie like 2 weekends ago. Like, it came in fourth of the movies released that weekend. That's disturbing to me. Anywho, so I guess I'm just like watching Shauna's face here. For those of you who are listening to it, she's got like some smiles, some furrowed brows, like she's not quite sure what's happening. But this is where that word of the week came out, decentering whiteness. Because what landed on me in this was one, anyone can become a DEI professional, because this guy does an online course and gets sent a card saying he is a certified DEI professional, which you and I have talked about being problematic.
Oh, we've talked about that.
All this language, decentering whiteness, systemic racism, marginalization, exclusion, the ways in which we string a lot of those words together, people who are kind of acculturated into this space, is meaningless to the average person who doesn't kind of think about this, right? And so I think that's a huge barrier. And I do think it's interesting that a lot of people are charging tens of thousands of dollars to share their perspectives on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that there are likely some disingenuous people who are purveyors of this message, and they are cashing in on other individuals, groups, or companies' good intentions. So they were the kind of things that I took from it. But overall, I feel gross about it. And I think it's pretty funny that I did not do my research on this movie. So what are your reactions to my little monologue there about this experience?
Oh, well, I think what's interesting about all of it is it reminds me very much of the humor and how some of the humor and entertainment lands depending on your political or ideological or theological perspectives on things, because the little giggles and chuckles that you mentioned in the audience reminds me of when I went to see Jeffrey Wright in American Fiction, where people weren't quite sure whether to take it as, oh, does this really happen or not? Or is this only for entertainment? Or is this real life, that life is art, art is life? What is this exactly? And what do I make of it? Discomfort, that reminds me of that. And it also goes back to Dave Chappelle many years ago when he stepped away and went to Africa for kind of a sabbatical, that said, I left and turned millions of dollars away because white people specifically, a lot of people, but white people specifically, were laughing a little bit too hard in the wrong places. And we know that the majority of his work centered on race and identity and so forth. So given that, it reminds me a lot of that. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge, for y'all that are faithful listeners, you'll know, and you've probably heard, we may need to do an entire podcast on just capitalism in general, Lisa, but you all will know that Dr. Lisa and I land at slightly different spots in regards to money making. Now, $35K to process white guilt depends on who's processing it. That's number one. Number two, what are their proven results of this, right? Are we feeding people into a very dangerous political party, or are we feeding people back into education or other places? What are the results of that? And at the same time, the unethical piece could land in a lot of different places, right? It could be the unethical, as in the first thing I thought about when you mentioned that he kind of infiltrated this group reminds me of Zoom bombing, right? Like when we first went into the pandemic and people were still trying to do great DEI work and people were Zoom bombing their efforts because they wanted to intercept what they were doing and get them kind of off their rocker, if you will. And it just made it very hard to do our work in virtual spaces. So it reminded me of that. But, I think, to your point with this particular movie, I would have, if I had not done any research and I just went off the screenshot that was sent to me, I would think the very same things that you and your friend thought, was that let's process this, let's do some introspection as to, am I racist or not? That's what I would have assumed versus, am I racist tongue in cheek, meaning it's no possible way that I can be racist. So let me infiltrate groups and make a mockery of racism, and what more liberal thought would deem racist. And so I'm not interested in that kind of entertainment. And I'm glad that at least we've had a glimpse of, again, the thought patterns, the thought processes of other people as far as how they think, because I guarantee you the same groups aren't necessarily walking in to see American fiction. There's not going to be too much overlap in those groups,
Right. Right.
and you happen to be one of those folks that would overlap, but intentionally. That takes me back to the previous question. Had you read a more thorough or different description of the movie, would you have still gone? Well, we don't know. We may never know.
No, probably not. Probably not, right? So it was an accidental
Yeah.
action that I think is instructive, right? As
Yeah, for
excruciating
sure.
as it was.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and his infiltration of that group and kind of making a mockery
Uh-huh.
of it. I also want to think about, okay, well, I've watched these mockumentaries where it's been a liberal person, right? Or a person with different opinions going into kind of an alternate space where they are doing the same thing. Did I call that unethical? I don't know that I did. And is that
Right,
hypocritical,
right.
right? Because you're still misleading someone. You're still asking for trust under the guise of something that you're not. That feels
Mm-hmm.
unfortunate. I mean, in this case, you have marginalized people leading the
Yeah,
session, so it is a little different. But I do think that
right.
there's a self reflection that this has precipitated for me around the ways in which I might be more inclined to say something is unethical versus something is not, right? Depending on how it does or does not align with my values,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. Well, and I've had that kind of go back and forth in my brain, because by the time you all have heard this podcast, there has been yet another assassination attempt on 45, right? And Dr. Lisa and I had a very good exchange back and forth as to, if we could remove our disdain for 45, would we believe that this is an actual assassination or not? What would be our response? Would our response be any different? And I did think about that. And I did try to put in a person that I value much more than
Right.
45. And I felt like I had a similar response. No, I don't want anyone taking someone else's life. As much as I despise that man, it is not the responsibility of someone else to invoke harm on them or anyone, especially not for the sake of politics. I don't want to see the
Mm-hmm.
man hurt. I also don't want to see him in office. So, given that, I think you're bringing us back home to the point of, if we are intellectually mature enough to peel away our like or dislike for a person, a group, an ideology, etc., would we still have similar responses? And we know, we have seen for many people that has not been true. Like, think
Right.
about
Right.
even as neutral as you can be, neutral journalists or reporters that came in and provided the same quote or the same information, and people thought it was, for example, Obama, and they hated it, but the very same quote came out by a Republican, or specifically 45, and they were okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, I think we have to use that balance that you keep bringing up around, am I balanced in thinking about how I feel about this?
Mm-hmm.
I probably would have a small personal how could I say? I would have a moment if God forbid anything happened to President Obama. I wouldn't have as much of a moment if anything happened to 45. That does not mean that I want something to happen to either one of them.
Right. Right.
And so, and can we go through that logical thought process? I'm not sure. And so these folks and, setting folks up in such a way that people assume that they're in a trusted space, possibly a confidential space, and it wasn't, that's a little bit scary to me. And especially as someone who does this work for a living as a facilitator, not knowing who's in the room and their intentions in the room, that's very concerning and very scary.
Right, and they had a film crew in this, so they all must have signed consent forms, but they signed the consent forms under a false pretense, right? Because they didn't know this was a mockumentary, right? They didn't know that someone was going to be in there under false pretenses. So that feels
That's
even
why,
worse.
to your great point and to what you do for a living and do so exceptionally well, Lisa, that's why we call it not just consent, but informed consent. They were not fully informed, even though they consented. That's not okay. We know that's not okay, right? So, oof, well, look, I'm sorry that you lost that $15, Lisa, but I hope you consider it an investment. I will even replace that $15 so that you don't have to worry about it ever again, because I
Oh no.
know you and I both would have been like, what the hell is this? Yeah, this problematic, very problematic.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
uh
Very problematic. I kind of
and
want you to watch it, but also don't because I don't want you to give money to it. So,
right, well, that's the key. Well, and think, I know we got to wrap this part up, but just thinking about, maybe there were folks in the room that truly were trying to work through white guilt in such a way that they could move into more allyship. And how might that put them like a turtle back in its shell? Like, nope, 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 nope. I can't trust these environments. I was already trying to show some semblance of courage to go into a shared space to process this. But now that someone's infiltrated it, I don't know what they're going to do with this information. They aren't who they said they were. Nope, nope, nope. I'm just going to go back into my white oblivion, and I'm not going to make these efforts anymore. I have a problem with that for them as well. Yeah. So let's move into phase two, despite how riled up we've gotten over phase one. Um, phase two might rile us up too, Lisa. Goodness. Um, I can't say this is news, but yet it is new, a new iteration of the same story, y'all. In that most recently, Miami Dolphin Tyreek Hill was stopped on the way to his game, like maybe 2-3 hours before his game at home, and was forcibly dragged from his car, being pulled over for speeding and no seatbelt. Apparently, based on the video, because Lisa, I did watch it 2 or 3 times, and he was told to wind down his window, but didn't wind it down fast enough, which then led to this whole dragging him out of the car situation. Now, obviously, this is a very highly paid athlete who is driving a very nice sports car. I don't understand why it was necessary for him to wind down the window at a certain speed or not. That just seemed kind of just not a requirement per se. I've seen people literally give like an inch of the window, and if you wanted their ID, they would slip it through the inch of the window. They were still complying, but they weren't rolling down the window all the way. And so, anyway, the point being, we've seen this story play out before, y'all, where African American men continue to be the targets of police brutality. On top of that, as they are targets of that police brutality, let's just go out and pull out any speck of dust or dirt that you might think is relevant to what's going on, when actually there may not be a speck of dirt. And if there is, it may not be relevant. And so, they're bringing out, for example, prior domestic violence allegations, and using it to justify how police treated him. Fortunately, he had a friend, I think it might have been a teammate, with him as well. And you could hear him in the video telling his friend, call my agent, because again, what struck me about even that statement was that this is a Black man who knows how this goes. He's either experienced it before or he's witnessed it before. And so instead of any improper language, instead of any, I'm fighting against the police, he's like, I need to make it home alive. So let me tell my teammate to call my agent, call someone who I know can be of assistance, because I've seen these types of situations go left before. So the police officer who detained Tyreek in Florida had already had a bunch of suspensions between 2020, 1999, excuse me, in 2020. And so this person did not have a clean record themselves. And so you can see them very clearly. You can hear their voice, all of this going on. This is all happening at the same time of the police officers that are also on trial for Tyre Nichols' murder in Memphis. So, as I said, we're continuing to see the same stories play out over and over and over again, knowing that things don't always bode well for Black men. And at the same time, I've shared with y'all before on this podcast, yes, I'm raising two Black men, so I absolutely care about situations like this. And at the same time, I have a very close family member who serves as a police officer and has served for over 20 years. I think the root of the matter, and Lisa, you can probably speak much more to this than I could, is that what are we doing at the bottom basement root of how police officers are trained to understand what's going on in the world, right? Based on identities. I doubt very seriously that they are. And so given that, I'm just tired of these types of incidences always being treated as individual, discrete, critical incidences, rather than looking at the broad reach of these types of incidences that are now huge data sets that show us that there's something that's been going on and it's always been going on. And what in the world are we going to do about it without having to send people home in a box to their family members because police brutality is real? Not all police officers, and I hate that I even have to say that, because intelligent people will know that when you speak, you're not speaking of everyone. I'm personally not speaking of everyone, but we have a trend. And we just happen to have a trend going back to Tyreek's quote, which I absolutely love, that he said, what if I wasn't Tyreek Hill? Meaning, what if I didn't have money? What if I wasn't famous? It still happened to me. And what if I didn't have my name? I didn't have the Miami Dolphins posting a very clear statement as to how problematic this incident was on all of their social media. What if I didn't have all that backing and I was just the no-name Black man that is forcibly put down in the middle of the street? Problematic, very problematic.
Yeah, I think a couple of points I want to draw out is the so I don't actually know anything about the allegations of domestic violence. I mean, I know that domestic violence is pervasive in the NFL, so it wouldn't surprise me. But this is what white people do, right? Well, this person has abused folks, so this is his comeuppance, right? Like, I think that, well, I agree with you. It's highly problematic. I also think both can be true, right? He could have abused an intimate partner and not been held accountable for it.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, experience police brutality, right? Like, those two things they're not either or, right? And so I find that kind of analysis highly troubling, which is kind of to your point that we talked about in the prior phase, right? Like, we find Donald Trump to be repugnant, right? But that's not the same. That is not a reason for wanting violence to be enacted upon him, right?
Absolutely
like the two
right,
things can be true, right?
Right.
And so there's just this lack of analysis or ability for people to hold multiple truths at the same time, particularly when we're talking about race, right? Particularly when we're talking about Black and African American men in particular. So that piece I just want to underscore. And then the other piece, about the window, right? I realize he doesn't have bulletproof glass, or at least I don't think he has bulletproof glass on his
Mm-hmm.
window. But what strikes me is I can understand when you are when you have witnessed either from friends, family members, or just from people that you've seen on TV, police officers shooting at people who look like you through the car window, I could also understand why you might not want to roll down your window, right? I don't actually know how much of a barrier the glass would be, but presumably some. So even if that wasn't a conscious thing he was thinking of, although I imagine he probably was thinking of it, that's understandable to me. Why, if you're being pulled over for speeding and the officer is escalating their aggression, that you might not want to roll down your window, right? Like, I feel like that is an area that we need to think about. The other thing, Shauna, and I'm wondering what you think about this, is I haven't watched the video, and I had made a choice a while ago to not watch the videos where it's black men or a person of color being abused, because often in very, very painful and difficult ways, because I just feel like that is exploitative, to use the term that we like, right? As a white person watching black pain and violence against black people as entertainment. I don't know if you disagree with my choice there. I know that other people have made it, but that's kind of, I turn it off. Like, I don't think CNN and all these other, I don't think they should be playing it on repeat. Like, I find that to be problematic and disrespectful, and kind of like a grotesque
Mm-hmm.
form of entertainment, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I'm thinking about, well, two things. Let me go back to what you were mentioning before about the window. So if everyone recalls and can go back to 2015 or so, Sandra Bland, the 28-year-old African American woman who supposedly died of asphyxiation in custody in a county jail, was also pulled over. And I remember at that time, I was still doing a lot of triathlon training, still doing a lot of marathon training. So I was an extremely, what we call the 0 dark 30 crew. Like, we were up at 4 or 5 o'clock to get to the gym early, go for early runs before work, that type of thing. And I remember on the way to the gym, this was maybe a few weeks after her death. I remember getting pulled over on the way to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning. I live in Prince George's County, and so it actually is kind of rare that you would get a white police officer to pull you over, because we do have a very diverse police force in the county. But it happened to be a white police officer that pulled me over in that moment, in the dark, by myself, no one else around. Obviously, who else in the world is up at that time in the morning? And I did exactly that. I cracked my window open an inch. I was actually starting to cry at the moment, because I'm thinking to myself, specifically of Sandra Bland, specifically of, oh my God, I'm an idiot. I got up early this morning to go to the gym, didn't really have to go, wasn't really thinking about anything other than my usual MO that I'd been doing for years. And now I've gotten pulled over and I may not get home. And I pulled my license and registration, and I slipped it through the 1 inch that I had in my window, so he could see everything that was going on. And fortunately, which it kind of chokes me up to even recount everything that happened in that moment, but the white police officer said, ma'am, we've been watching the news too. Don't worry, you're going to be just fine. He kind of consoled, because he understood and he acknowledged what was going on in the news to Black people, but specifically to Black women. And so I was so shaken by it, I just went home. I didn't even do that workout, because I was just shaken by it from the connection to the news and Sandra Bland and so forth. So I can understand the window piece because of the context within which we're functioning. So let me just put that there from a personal note. The other piece, as far as consuming it, I'm with you, Lisa. I thought about this the other day, and again, I'm not a news person. I'm none of that, but I always wondered about the word saturation, meaning, could there at least be a limit to, or for example, when I get alerts from universities that I've worked at before, or other institutions that I've worked at before, where there's been an alert, whether it's an Amber Alert or whatever it may be. It might be like a text or a message that sent that, hey, we're looking for such and such a person or what have you. And you have a choice. So you know that, let's say there's been, God forbid, a kidnapping or an Amber Alert or a Silver Alert or whatever it is. There will be a notice, but then there's a secondary link that if you want to see a photo of the person or if you want to see a video of what has happened, you can click on that or not. And unfortunately, that's not what happened, because with so many, I mean, even with Freddie Gray, I had also made a commitment not to watch any videos of anything, but I was walking out of through a hotel lobby, and there were screens and monitors all over the place, and it was already playing as I was walking through. See what I mean? And so for me, at some point, I'm like, well, shoot, even for those of us who don't want to consume it, we're living in environments where it's like, how much control do we have so that we don't get to this point of saturation where we've watched something 20 times and we're tired of seeing it, right? So like for George Floyd, to this day, I've never watched it. Don't plan on watching it. I had such a visceral reaction to Freddie Gray's murder that I couldn't watch anymore. So at least I don't intentionally, right? And so I'm with you on that. And I agree. There has to be a point of saturation, especially once we get to the place where, as much as we want to say we're not numb to it, I think we do become numb to it. I think we do become saturated. Well, oh, it's just another day of a school shooting. Oh, it's just another day of it's just another day. And I don't want it to feel like another day, because that's another human being that's not here. Problematic.
Right. And I think white people are so indifferent to the pain and violence enacted upon people of color in the US, right? That there is, so for some of those white people, there is an awakening. Like, oh, like this actually does happen, right? In viewing the video. But for many, because of that indifference and that lack of care, then it just, it feels exploitative. Like they're just watching a person at an enormously difficult and painful point in their life, right, where this horrible thing is about to happen, and they're like sitting there with their popcorn, right? Like it feels I can't put words to it, but yeah, like I think that there is the numbness, I think, for white people is almost already there, right?
Oh, for sure. And so here's where my African American brain makes the connection, though, Lisa. I hear you and I'm with you. I agree 100% with what you just said. And at the same time, I now think through the lens of Mamie Till's perspective. So for those that have not taken the time to go, I strongly encourage you to go to the National African American Museum here in DC. It's one of the Smithsonian's. Go there because they have a special exhibit of the restored casket of Emmett Till. And it shows the Ebony magazine covers that are iconic, where Mamie Till made a specifically conscious effort to say, put the open casket photos of my son, which really, it doesn't even look like a human being based on his face and all that happened to him. I want the world to see what happened to my boy, right? Now, the asshole in me that's also a parent and also Black probably would do that shit too, right? But at the same time, I'm with you, Lisa, that it could be both sides of the coin of, I don't want to continue to exploit Black people in their pain. And at the same time, you need to see it because some of you need evidence that it's actually happening and not a figment of Black folks' imagination and an over response to something, right? So I'm kind of Mamie Till-ish when it comes to this conversation too.
No, that's a really great point, right? And I think that those people who need that, it can be helpful for. But like speaking for myself, I don't need that. I don't need it. No, you don't. Right?
Exactly.
And that's so then I'm like, so what is the reason why I would watch it? Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There would be no reason. There really would be no reason. I mean, even thinking about, clicks and viewership and so forth, what is that really saying? Like if whatever media outlet said, oh, there's been a 30% uptick in the people people that watched Black male violence against Black males. Well, what is that really saying? Is that saying
Right.
that people have their popcorn, or is it saying people are concerned?
Yeah.
We can't necessarily
We
splice
don't
out
know.
what that means
Hmm.
from a
Hmm.
data perspective, even.
Yeah.
So I'm just not interested in contributing to that. But at the same time, for the folks that are the doubters and the ones that always have the perfectly logical explanations
Yeah.
as to
Yep.
why Black people and Black men are the targets of everything, here's the video evidence.
Well, yeah, like as though not rolling down your window is justification, or the appropriate response to not rolling down your window is to drag you out of the car, right? Like that's the perfectly logical explanation. Well, he didn't roll down his window. Okay, so if you don't roll down your window, does that mean I can drag you out of the car? Right?
Right,
Like it's
right.
like a totally disproportionate response.
Oh,
But
for sure.
we are we have we've taken on two pretty tough issues here, and I think maybe our last phase should, well, perhaps I was going to say be lighter, but now that I
It's
think
no
about it, it might
lighter.
not be.
It's no lighter. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, let me guide folks into phase three, because it does have a little bit of a connection in regards to what are we taking in, or what are we being saturated by when it comes to media, journalism, communication, social media. So as y'all know, I have a now teenager. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old, and so of course it popped up on my uh, Instagram account. I have everything connected. I have unfazed, unedited Instagram connected. I have both of my boys' Instagram accounts connected. And so it popped up that there would be new rules for teens that have account restrictions. It determines who can make their accounts public based on your age. Once you put in your birth date, it determines that you must be connected to a parent's account, all these different things that I'm still reading through. And so with that, I thought it was really interesting because it kind of brought me to another report that just came out that talked about Gen Z, which is older than my son. My son is technically Gen Alpha, but a little bit older. Gen Z, guess what, y'all? For everybody that keeps stereotyping generations younger than yourselves, this might be surprising. Gen Z has regrets about social media. Regrets, right? So since we thought they were just all into it, not always. So the Harris report found a number of different things, but let me just tick off a few. 60% of Gen Z is on social media for at least 4 hours a day. Now, last I checked, that's at least a part-time job, Lisa. That's a long ass time to be on social media every day, right? And then you have these connections to public health issues. So sleep deprivation, look, I might be guilty of that one as Gen X, because I'll find something interesting and then I'll go down the rabbit hole. But sleep deprivation for Gen Z, body image distortion, depression, eating disorders, sexual predation, sextortion, problematic usage. All of this is going on as a result of this. And so what I appreciated about the report itself is that they brought up the connection between generations and social media use, but then they also made this parallel connection with public health concerns. If this had been any other public health concern, then people might highlight it more. So imagine a particular food or drug or anything else in our public health ecosystem having these types of outcomes, then folks would probably be more up in arms with it. And so I think what was really impactful was one of the last points that they asked. They asked a question about, do Generation Z, do they feel as if they would be better off if social media didn't exist, right? I'm like, oof, that's a tough one, right? If we could turn back the hands of time, what do we think? Almost half of Gen Z wishes social media platforms like X and TikTok didn't exist. Did not exist. I'm like, whoa. And so, I realized that every tool, no matter what it is, I mean, we can talk about almost anything in our lives right now that can be used for good or for bad. This one is leaning stronger towards the detrimental. And so I appreciate this being compared to public health concerns. And at the same time, I'm like, well, now I got to figure out what to do. Because, of course, as adults, especially those of us who use social media for various points, whether it's, I primarily use my social media for business stuff, but then also to keep my family connected to whatever's going on in the boys' lives. Those are my priorities, really, when it comes to social media. But for other people, it's for different forms of influence. And we know that's the case, especially during an election season. But even if it wasn't during an election season, they use it for influence. And so, Lisa, I'm interested to hear what you think about these regrets around social media. And I know we don't have the answer when it comes to correcting these regrets, but I do think that with AI coming up and some of these other things, we do need to think down the street and around the corner around what would be next, so that the next iteration of social media doesn't have these detrimental pieces with it. So what do you think about all this?
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because the public health impact, particularly on young teen girls, has been widely advertised. I mean, Meta and well, I guess Instagram is part of Meta, but like Facebook, Instagram, all of the CEOs of these companies have been pulled in front of Congress a number of times to kind of speak to and attest to the fact that they are causing damage, right? And what are they going to do about it? I think one of the stats from this most recent research that was most eye-opening for me was that 23% or more of Gen Z spend 7 or more hours on social media a day. That's 1/4. So it was a representative sample. It was about 1,000 people that fall into the 18 to 27-year-old category, the Gen Z category. And so what they're extrapolating, right, is that 25% of Gen Z people spend 7+ hours. That just was shocking. And so I think the other piece that stands out to me is a lot of the assertions around the damage social media does have come from older people, parents, family members, teachers, politicians. But this is the demographic with whom those older people are referencing, who are themselves now saying, it's not great, folks, right? Like, it's actually had a negative impact on my life, and I wish these things didn't exist. So I think that is really alarming. I guess, why didn't we ask people sooner, right? Why aren't we asking the people it affects sooner? But the other piece, right, TikTok is about to be banned in the United States, because TikTok is parent company is owned by China, and they passed a law this year that basically come January, if it's not sold off, if the US version of TikTok is not sold off, it'll be gone. It won't be accessible in the United States. And that is a whole other conversation related to free speech and access, right? But if you've got this many people, at least in Gen Z, saying they wish TikTok had never been invented, then maybe TikTok going away, albeit for reasons I might not agree with, like maybe that's actually going to be beneficial, right? I don't know. Like it does shed a new light on banning of TikTok, right? And what actually could be a positive consequence of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear what you're saying around that. I think what's so interesting is, again, isn't it interesting how we don't condone the means, but we're okay with the ends, given these other things. Yeah, we're gonna have to wait until January to figure out exactly what's going to happen with TikTok. But I've had other friends on other social media platforms saying that, wait, I built my entire business on TikTok. Or I remember when I was going through the coursework for my program on social impact strategy, and that is how they used TikTok to educate people on lots of different assistive technologies in very brief chunks of, this is how you use Dragon on your computer to speak into a microphone and it types your paper if you're unable to do so, or, all these different things that it was educating people on. And now they're like, well, which platform would I go to? I don't know, because the entire thing was built on TikTok. So, small businesses that need to have social media platforms that are free or close to free, because they're always working on a shoestring budget. So, with that, I think, again, we always have to think down the street and around the corner, because guess what? Now that everybody's so excited about AI, we know that somebody's going to throw a price tag on it or some other limitation on it so that the people who abuse it, hopefully, won't be able to, but who knows? And the people who really need it may not be able to use it. Again, everything has its what is it? Every sword has two blades. I've heard that before. There's two sides to it. How are you using
Yeah.
it? And that's my concern is how are we using it? So I've seen kids, like, for example, the reason why we even set up a Instagram account for Kendrick is because, frankly, he wants to be a professional athlete. What we found in that community is that they have very active social media platforms to
Okay.
get them in front
Okay.
of recruiters earlier so that they have better chances of getting a ride into college or wherever next they're going to go. Well, we're not using it for malicious intent, and we don't even let him look at his own account. We post to that account and he tells us what to post, but he's not looking around at what anyone else is saying to him. Well, what if he was? And then he has body image
Yeah.
issues. And then,
Yeah.
it could be eating disorder that emerges, all these different things if you don't have watchful eyes. So, yeah, we got a ways to go with all this social media stuff, but I'm glad that they are actually asking folks, especially social media natives that can't even remember not having it, to give us their reflections on how it's affected their lives. I think that's important.
Yeah. What do you think about the new Instagram changes that came in recently related to ratcheting down young people's teenagers' access to Instagram and requiring parental or guardian permission, putting account restrictions? I mean, do you feel like that is a step in the right direction?
I do think it's a huge step in the right direction. And let me tell you why. In fact, this is hot off the press why I think it's important. So for my boys, we have actually, isn't it interesting? We counteract social media with social media. Both of the boys have their PTOs Facebook pages for every grade. Even if you're in the same school, they have each grade. So what is it? I think Trey is class of 2029, I think. So I'm on that Facebook page. Just this morning, there was a post on the parent page saying, hey, just letting you all know, if you come past the school, we saw that the windows were covered and the doors were covered. There have been threats on Instagram in regards to threatened shootings in the district next to us. I guess the best practice now is that if you're in a neighboring district, so it wasn't a threat in our district, but if you're in a neighboring district, then they still do an investigation. I'm grateful for that, right? But as you can see, they traced it. It was a kid who said something flippant. The parent of the kid didn't even know they had an Instagram account. And so when the parent is asked about their kid posting this, and this is an 11, 12-year-old kid, now we have to figure out what to do as far as disciplining the kid. And the parent feels oblivious and helpless because they're like, wait a minute, as a parent, you're thinking, I never set up an Instagram account for them. They don't have an account. If you don't think I look up Trey Gold and Kendrick Gold just to make sure nobody is using their name or that they're not setting up stuff that we don't know about. But this is what happens. It sends parents into a panic, all these different things until we get an official message from the superintendent of schools about an hour later saying, hey, it's a drill. We posted this on the page, it's a drill today. Please don't be alarmed. Someone even saw a police officer walking into the school and panicked. It was a police officer in uniform getting off work, going as a parent to pick up their kid to take them to a doctor.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
this is what can happen. And so that's why I'm a big fan. Now, I haven't looked at all the details yet. I just started reading it. But for now, I'm very pleased with it because there are some parents that are oblivious to what's going on. And I would love for parents to be more aware. I'm more aware, and their dad is like a professional hacker. And so we know how this goes. So that's helpful, but not everybody has a professional hacker as a parent.
No, or like I think some of it's obliviousness, but some parents just don't have time, right? And they to monitor. But this is going to require that, right? Because kids of a certain age, so like Kendrick's age, they cannot get an account now
That's right. That's right.
without
Exactly.
approval, right? So it'll be really
Exactly.
interesting to see how this plays out, and how Gen Alpha, so the your generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
What they think about social media, because this was a Gen Z research study. So
Mm-hmm.
will Gen Alpha feel differently? I will be
Right.
pretty interested to see how that plays out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have to
Mm-hmm.
wait, and we'll wait for Kendrick and Trey's study on social media in a few years, right?
Oh,
uh,
yep. All right,
well,
let's wrap it up.
Today was jam packed. Yes, let's wrap this thing up, y'all. So, thank you all for listening in on yet another unfazed, unedited podcast. So, please don't forget to follow us, and leave us some comments on our YouTube page under Unfazed, Unedited. We're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Of course, we're on Instagram, since we were just talking about Instagram, LinkedIn, of course, and you can email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com. We have a website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can check out all of our archived episodes, as well as, of course, the newest podcast. And so if you liked what you heard, even one phase of it, then please subscribe, leave a review, share this with your friends or coworkers or anyone else in this phase of your life. So, Dr. Lisa, until next week.
Until next week, see ya.